I'm Washington Ali, and welcome to Project Become, a project uncovering the unspoken thoughts that stop us from living a life worth living. I'm not here to tell you what to do or who to be, and I certainly don't have the answers. I'm just hoping to uncover the secrets of the world while speaking with explorers, dreamers, thinkers, and creators. I hope we all find something that helps us accept who we've become, and find something that helps us create someone we are proud of becoming. Welcome to Project Become. Today, I'm joined by a great friend, Leslie Zimbabwe, aka Chak, aka a creative, aka a generalist, aka someone who is truly interested in the world, in psychology, within themselves, and also, of course, the madness that's going on around the world right now.
Oh
You know,
boy. Oh
yeah.
boy. Wow. Washi,
Bef-
thank you so much for having me, first and
any
foremost.
anytime,
Are you
always.
ready?
I am ready. I have been waiting for this conversation. It's one that I think so many people are going to get so much value from. So many people are going to maybe think differently about themselves and about the world. And
Hmm.
at very least, it's something that at least they can have a seed planted to start thinking differently. But before we get into all of that, my friend, please give us a 30-second, 1 minute elevator pitch about who you are, what it is that you do, and also describe yourself if you'd like to.
Um, so my name is Chak, or as some of my other friends call me, Leslie. I don't mind either or. I'm 26 years old. I live in the northwest of England, the Lake District, Kendal, and I just consider myself someone who's a curious individual and pays more attention than you would like to imagine on just the socio-economic status and situations in the world and what's currently going on. And it's something that only a handful of people, my close friends, I really discuss and engage with these sort of conversations in. And I've always been big in psychology. I've always been big in um, philosophy as well and personal development books. And just trying to master the difficult art of thinking critically and objectively. And yeah, that's pretty much me.
Amazing. It sounds like to if I was listening, I'll be like, "Whoa, this guy sounds deep." you know.
Oh, I
Um,
don't know about that. I don't know about that.
but yeah, really, let's start. I'd really love to start with who it is you were being, who it is you used to be before you came to the sudden realizations, before you made certain U-turns in your life. Who is it that you used to be? Were you shy? Were you adventurous? Were you always have you always been curious?
Um, yes and no. I think it basically really took off when I adapted and adopted a, a good relationship with reading. Um, at GCSE level and then A level, I really enjoyed English and English literature. I basically retook my GCSEs, and the first time round, I didn't do too terribly, but I was able to like get A in English and a B in lit without really trying. And then as I decided to retake it, I was still naturally gravitated towards reading, and I was never good with numbers. I'm not a sciencey person, so with English literature, English language, and even history to a certain degree, I just stuck to those subjects more, and I was able to read and comprehend and absorb everything I was reading. So it was like a very natural uh, relationship that just manifested organically. I have quite a very academic family, and they were always big on like read, read, read. Um, PlayStation, Facebook, phone comes way after studies, kind of thing. So I just got into that habit of reading, and I then started to read things that I would personally enjoy. And even at the age of like 14, 15, 16, I got really into like my health and fitness, and it was more at that point. I think YouTube was a bit more of a popular medium and a good way to source information. But I would still do the very conventional thing of like reading a men's health magazine, and then at that same stage, my interest in fashion and pop culture started to grow. And then I'll be reading like GQ magazines and stuff like that. So reading just really started to become something I genuinely enjoyed. So yeah, that kind of got into more curiosity, and um, I think
But-
there's a lot that's happened in the last couple of years, last 3 years. Obviously, in the last 2 years, a lot of things have transpired. But already, like I said, I was already reading personal development books, and there was a point where I'd just steal like my cousins' books from their shelf and their reading material, and it was mostly personal development books.
wow,
So it was, even though I was more than happy to leer into that realm. It was also one of those that was the only option I had, kind of thing.
that's really
So it was
interesting.
all like the classics, How to Win Friends
Friends
and
and
Influence
influence people.
People. Yeah, and then what's the other classic that everyone, Rich Dad Poor
For the,
Dad.
yeah.
Like I'd read those books like 3 times over within a year, and at a very, which isn't anything remarkable, but at a very relaxed pace, willingly. But I became one of those people where I wasn't as focused on how many books I read in a year, let's say. It
Hmm.
was more of a thing of how well did I understand that book, you know?
Mm.
And the other thing is that I'm actually a very slow reader. So I have to really be fixated on what I'm reading
Yeah.
for it to fully go in. So I'm not ashamed or really bothered to then go back a few pages if I haven't understood the couple of pages.
Tell me
So
this.
that's where, yeah, yeah, yeah.
What is it about the books did you want to get? I heard that you built the habit of reading, that you grew up
Mm,
in a family of academics, so reading was just it was like dinner. My uncle says to me, like,
yeah, it
you
was
better
second
you
nature.
gotta eat books, right? Uh, so what was your purpose of like continuing to grab those books? Because I personally know that personal development books have this addictive nature. You read one and you think you're not good enough, then you see another book and then you're like, oh my goodness, there might be some secret in there that might have not have
Yeah.
unlocked. What was your that was so that's how I moved through personal development book. How about yourself? Like, what made you want to keep on picking up the books?
Well, the one thing that I've noticed, and I think studies do show this, is that men naturally tend to gravitate more towards non-fiction books as compared to girls. And that's a piece of information that I didn't know. But as I said earlier, my cousins and my brothers, they just had a lot of self-development books, and I was kind of off, because I've actually backtracked a little bit of this, and I'm more willing to read fictional literature more, because I
Mhm.
think you can learn a lot from them. But my whole thing was, if I'm going to read something, it's going to help me become a better person, help me in some shape or form with some sort of valid information, kind of thing.
Yeah.
I mean, who hasn't grown up reading a couple of Harry Potter books, or even if you are British born, you might be familiar with the Alex Rider books. I'd read a few of the Alex Rider books, the Horrid Henrys, like,
This,
a lot of like that kind of thing. But as I got older, I was like, I don't really care for fiction that
mm,
much. And because in English literature you do read a lot of fiction anyways, it was kind of like, that's my bread and butter, that's work, so to speak, that's what I
yeah.
actually have to study,
Mm.
academically. So the personal development stuff was, for own interest, out of curiosity.
Amazing. That's really cool. Like, I think I can completely relate to reading personal development books to get an end result that's practical, that I can work myself towards, or even just gaining the information of that, and I guess, like, even to this day, I really, really, really hesitate to start reading a fiction book, uh, um
Yeah.
and it's really interesting you say that, because don't get me wrong, like 2 weeks ago I read an amazing book called How to Get Out the Maze or something like that, by this guy, I forgot his name was, but it's like, I genuinely want, when I'm reading, I want something to enrich me and benefit my life. And as you're saying, similarly, when you do read a fiction book, you still receive so many lessons through the characters that are there. Yeah, I'm not particularly interested in that. I've read The Alchemist, which is probably
Yeah.
my favorite book of all time. Ironically, it's a fiction book,
Mm.
but at the same time, I'm still chasing information, knowledge, to either help me learn about the world in a greater sphere, or even help me improve myself as well. So that's really important, that's really cool that you pointed that out, because I actually hated reading until like 3 or 4 years ago, so to hear
Yeah.
that you've always been a natural reader, had a natural proclivity to information, seems,
Mm.
let's say, very inbred, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I do give a lot of credit to um, reading, but I also pay homage to podcasts because we're living in the age where now podcasts are a really, really big thing, and podcasts at the moment I'm probably utilizing more, and I'm listening to podcasts a lot more than I'm reading books. And it's more to do with the fact that podcasts are very convenient. You can be multitasking. You can be you know working, you can be studying, you can be going to the gym or at the gym, doing so many things, and you're engaged. Whereas with reading, it's a really classic pastime where you have to have the luxury of time.
Mm,
All distractions have to be uh, negated and stuff. And the thing is, what I noticed with podcasts is that even if you're half-heartedly listening and you're not fully engaged, later on you remember something or you say something that was in the podcast, and you're like, how did I even pick that up? Kind of, it's really fascinating. So yeah, I mean, yeah, podcasts for me, if I'm not listening to music, it's a podcast.
mm.
So yeah.
So, yeah, 100%. I completely agree with that. So, basically, so you grew up with a proclivity for information, for bettering
Mm,
yourself. I want to touch on the pop culture, being influenced by pop culture, GQ magazine,
yeah.
and getting into fashion and all of that. Like, what, when I say get into fashion, I mean getting into your dress sense and like dressing well.
Mm,
What
mm.
about that was so important to you? What about that do you think nourished you?
Well, growing up, I always, when I got more serious academically and I wanted to and go into uni, one of my first ambitions or career paths I really considered was being an editor at GQ. Um, and the other thing that I realized whilst I was reading a lot of GQ was, I think it's fair to say that all journalists, and if you are in the realm of journalism, you have to be very eloquent, you have to have a good command of the English language. But I really noticed that from reading magazines and everything in between, the use of language that these journalists were using was really fascinating. I was like, I could learn a thing or two from this. So it
Mm,
just kept on steering me more towards that side. And to go back to the thing that you touched on, pop culture. Um, at the time, I didn't realize, but now I realize it more, that pop culture has such a big impact on the culture as a whole. Um, you even see this in politics. You see this in political campaigns. People running for office, and especially in America, they'll try and show that they are in tune with the people and the culture, in
mm,
tune with what people really value and really take personally and hold really close to their heart. So yeah, it kind of became a thing, and especially with the prevalent dominance of social media, you know, you have to be aware of pop culture. You are, just because of the use, you are in the realms of pop culture and the culture.
Yeah, 100%. But don't you think that? So for me, I feel as if I needed pop culture to brand me in some way, shape, or form. I wanted that stamp. I wanted that stamp of approval from my associates, my friends, the world, and then also myself. Right, I wanted to feel like I was the man, and the easiest way for me to discover that I was the man was to blend into pop culture, and like what that led me into was like dressing reasonably okay, you know, as you do when you're like in your teenage
I think
years.
you did a good job. When I sang around with you, I think I think you've done it. You
Yeah,
did well.
I was trying, man. I was trying, you know. What I didn't realize is that pop culture was like leading me down this rabbit hole of hating the establishment. It was leading me down a rabbit hole of maximizing fun, maximizing enjoyment, maximizing everything apart from all the values that I had been brought up in, to essentially make me assimilate into the culture, make me as if that culture is all I am, make me as if that when in Rome, you are Roman, and that is it forever.
Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
can never choose to defect, you know. So like, talk to me about your journey of getting into the world of pop culture, let's call it, it's an easy word to use,
Mm.
and then defecting into having a contrarian view, a more contrarian viewpoint, because I know you've actually always had a contrarian viewpoint. You've always thought differently about things, but like as I've gotten older, I've noticed myself get a little more conservative, and when I say a little more conservative, I mean socially I am the most liberal person in the whole entire world. I don't care what you do. You live your life in how you live your life, and I'll be there to support you and enjoy it with you. Don't get.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm not missing out on the fun, you know. But but in culturally at home, or should I say, in my private life, it's more that I have more structure. I have rules. I have ways of doing things that wouldn't be considered free. But to me, it gives me that freedom, you know. So love to hear your journey in that and navigating through that,
right.
and then we can talk about the greater impact it's having on people who are
Yeah.
less understanding of themselves and what they want from life and how they're being guided into pop
Well,
culture.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because the one thing that I always say is that I'm not that political, in the sense that, okay, I read a little bit and I try my best to keep up with the news and, you know, current affairs a little bit more than the average person. But with that being said, I wouldn't be the person you would go to be like, Chak, what party should I vote for? Or can you give an insightful explanation to said mandate or referendum, etc., etc.? I am not your go-to person. It just so happens that the culture is now heavily infiltrated by politics, and I think that's actually an okay thing, because I think the personal becomes the political, and the political can become personal. So
Mm.
it's fine. But touching on what you also said about yourself, is that the one thing that I realized and that I recently learned is that there are things such as having a conservative temperament and brain, and a liberal brain and temperament.
What do you mean by that?
And so basically, you can be conservative in just how you function and how you address things and process them. The way that you can, just how orderly you are. So there was a study shown, and I'll just roughly touch on some of the examples very quickly. I think it was Harvard. I think it was Harvard University with undergrads, and basically it points out that the way that undergrads who are conservative keep their room is a lot more presentable and smarter, and then liberals are a little bit more messier. And then they went on deeper to explain that, it's because liberals are high in open creativity, they're a lot more creative, and then conservative minds and brains are a lot more industrious, and they're very much more orderly. They like a structure, they like a system. And I was thinking about, and one really interesting point is even the way that a conservative brain and a liberal brain processes trauma is significantly different.
Mm.
And I just found that really, really fascinating because, again, like you, I think I am very liberal. And, I think I'm a very, other identity markers for a conservative mind or a liberal mind, and me speaking on the liberal mind, is that you are a lot more agreeable. You are like, yeah. And so basically with the trauma thing, it's basically like you would react more with emotion, and then a conservative brain would I can't articulate it that well because it's not something that I'm well versed
Mm.
on.
Bro,
But
you're not
yeah,
an
there
expert.
were
Like,
just,
just say it how it is. Like
yeah,
how do you know what I
and
mean?
yeah, and it's really fascinating because I yeah, like I can see myself very liberal in a lot of ways. The way I process things is very liberal, but then I like the idea of having, structure. I like the idea of having order. And it's why most people who are liberal are in the arts. Because they're very creative. They can navigate through the realms of music. The literal arts and so on much better. And then you get the CEOs of businesses and so on who are a lot more conservative in temperament, because they know how to run and order things. And
Mm.
it's quite interesting.
I love that. I'm really good, really happy you made that distinction right there. Not conservative in political views, but conservative in temperament, in terms
mm,
of
mm.
being more structured, being more orderly, being more 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Whereas a creative person is probably like, I don't know, the Fibonacci sequence, which is a number that it's like all the prime numbers or something like that. So it's like a liberal person is more open to dance in the chaos, where a more conservative quote unquote person is more open to is less open to dance in the chaos and trying to organize that chaos. And yeah, so like as since we're here, let's move into, you've got some really, really important topics that you'd like to speak on today, and
Oh
I'd
yeah.
love to give you the floor for you to introduce them and for us to just dive deep into them, because I think our conversation has been really, it's I think it's like been a proving point, has been an analogy of like the evolution of how we see the world, and where you've come from, and also where you are now, and we'll touch on where you're going later. So
Well, when we were planning this, there was like a lot of things that we wanted to talk on. And as I was saying to you last night, it couldn't have been a more convenient time for us to do this podcast now, because so much has happened just in the last month alone.
yeah.
And even in the last week, there's been so much that's going on. So this podcast and what I want to talk to you about was like, mostly identity politics, cancel culture, activism and social justice warriors, and so on and so on, and just naturally just take its course. And the culture is heavily, heavily dominated by what's going on in politics, and that, to a certain degree, might mean that you have to pick a side. And I'm starting to realize that the world isn't necessarily as black and white as we
Mm.
would like it to be. There's actually a lot more gray area than there is black and white, and I think you can make a good case for that. And what I mean by that is, sometimes it's not always blatantly obvious and clear that this opposition or this side is right, and then the opposing side is wrong.
Mm.
You know, I think there needs to be more of a middle ground, and there usually is a lot of middle ground. And I think I don't like the idea of how you have to pick a side.
Yeah.
I think it's really unfair, and um, it's becoming very divisive, and especially in the unfortunate prime of identity politics. I don't think it's healthy,
Yeah, no, it's not
and
healthy.
I don't think it's the way forward either.
No, it's not. Um, like what I see, what you're touching on, the most beautiful thing in the whole entire world is that we're living in a world of in psychology they call it a drama triangle, right? So there's always a victim, and there's always a rescuer, and there's always an oppressor, essentially, right?
Yeah,
And it's all, and when you're in the drama triangle, right, what happens is the game of the drama triangle is everyone's trying to claim the victim, yeah, everyone's trying to claim the victim position, and everyone is literally just horizontally moving like this: a victim oppressor, a victim, I thought the other one, helper, and so on and so forth. And I think that there needs to be a message for reasonability. You know, there needs to be a message of that. Well, do you know what? Trump had, let's say, 20 good policies, and with these 20 good policies, I hated 3 of them. I hate 3. I don't like 3 of these policies. Rather than to attack the individual, and it seems as if the whole entire everything's personal right now, you know, and that personalization of everything is devoiding what you're saying, that the politics is the person and the person becomes the politics. And it's like, well, yes, they are inseparable, and yes, that you're not going to agree with everything anyone says anyway, you know. And it seems like this divide allows
okay,
separation to happen, allows God.
right. Right. So I'll try and explain this to the best of my knowledge on the issues that I have with identity politics.
Mm,
And um, so, how can I put this? Okay, so given that there are an infinite number of ways of interpreting the world, you could make a case that there has to be an infinite number of dimensions along which people may vary.
mm,
Now, what I mean by that is there are many, many, and most definitely an indefinite number of ways to categorize and perceive the world. So,
that's a big statement.
a couple of examples. A couple of examples can be you could categorize the world and people by their age,
Mm,
historical time.
mm,
You live now, or you live in the past, or you live in the future.
mhm,
Your sex and your gender, race, religion, geographical location.
mhm,
There are so many. Your eye color, your cognitive capabilities, so your IQ,
mm,
how smart you are intellectually. There are so many ways, and it can be even be random things, your height, your waist. It's infinite. It's infinite. So if you are a smart person, you might use some of those identity markers and ways of interpreting the world and put people into groups. Now, the one thing that I can't quite fathom is
mm,
why and how the identity politics players have made the canonical decision to put certain identity markers and certain groups and forms of identification above others.
mm,
So you get your most popular ones: race and ethnicity,
mhm,
sex and gender,
mhm,
religion, and so on.
Mm.
But like I said, that's a very good way of looking at the world.
Yeah,
It's a very good way to navigate through it.
100%.
But then there's this thing called intersectionality,
Mhm.
and intersectionality is where two different realms or ways of differentiating the world intersect, or identity markers.
Mhm.
So for me, I am
Black.
male.
Oh, I thought you were gonna start
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah. Well, you've completely gone straight to my point. How I perceive myself can be completely different to how you perceive me.
Yeah.
You see?
Mm.
So again, I'm a black male. I'm 26 years old.
Part of the 6 foot club.
Yeah. 6 foot club. I have brown eyes. So what then happens is you start to realize that because there are so many ways of interpreting the world and categorizing people,
Mhm.
how can you then choose and decide which identity markers are paramount?
Mm.
Because for me, this is very subjective, but you could make a case that one of the most important identity markers, and I think should be the most important, is cognitive capability and IQ.
Mm.
Especially if you are trying to navigate the world from, you know, not only an intellectual standpoint, but from a standpoint of someone who's trying to navigate the world in business, trying to recruit someone, trying to employ someone.
Yeah.
That might be the most important. So with all these identity markers, and as you start to realize that intersectionality is more and more common,
Mm.
the logical conclusion to intersectionality is individuality.
Mm.
You can't just box people into certain groups. You can't just put them in, because the individual is the ultimate minority.
Wow. Whoa. 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 The individual's the most is that's
Because no matter how much you stretch that up, you quickly realize that this person has so many identity markers,
mm.
and with that being established, there is no ways that he can belong to just one group or two groups or three groups.
Mm. Well, you saying that I like this. That's where I'm like I'm in 100% agreement with you. Yet that without those markers being included, right? That then creates a level of chaos that we have never had to experience, because usually we grew up in small communities, small groups, where you'd be nurtured in your group of 50 to 100 villagers, or 50 to 100 community members, dwelling members, right? Yeah, whereas we live in such big communities now that those intersectionalities not intersectionality, sorry, is those markers are necessary. Yet, I think the judgment is where I get pissed off. Don't get me wrong. The whole entire world gets pissed off, because who are you to judge the next person over? Who are you to place these markers? And having said that, I know that I am prejudiced towards someone trying to rob my house. I know that,
Well, before you even get into
yeah.
that, the other thing that you touched on is that we now have this landscaping warfare of multiple groups with different identity markers fighting in this battle, which I call the oppression Olympics. And there's a point that's being made that people are oppressed and my group is oppressed.
Mm,
And it's true. There are people that are oppressed and there are people who are suffering.
mm,
It's very, very true. But to a certain degree, you can't take it personally. And I know that sounds very controversial,
Mm.
but I think it's characteristic of life.
Yeah.
There's certain things that you can't control, and obviously there are things that you can
Mm.
control. And you can't just put the world into groups. And as I quite rightly stated, there's an infinite number of ways of interpreting the
Mm.
world. Therefore, there has to be an infinite number of dimensions along which people will vary. You can't categorize the world into these groups and then assume that you're in a group that inoculates you from playing the oppressor, from being the oppressed and not the oppressor.
Yeah. 100%. Uh,
Because one thing that a lot of people don't realize is that, and I have this conversation quite a lot with people, is that, did you know if you earn an annual income of $34,000 or more, you're in the top 1% that's ever lived
that's
in the history of the entire world.
no way. The entire world.
The ent-
The
the
entire
in
of
history of the entire world,
the,
not just the entire world.
the
You're in the 1%.
That's crazy. You know, I always think about it, but I always think about it differently. I always think about the amount of suffering that has happened throughout the the recorded history of mankind. The amount of
Mm.
wars, the amount of pillaging, the amount of destruction, chaos, the amount of ego from one tribe to another, then to one country to another, then to one continent to another, and to where we are now in possibly the easiest time to live of all time, apart from certain rural areas. And even for them,
But that's the other thing. That's the other thing though. And again, the literature and the statistics are there. If you lived in the West before 1895, you lived on less than $1 a day. These are Western countries, which in theory are meant to be the most progressive, the ones with the most technological advancements, the most stable.
mm,
$1 a day before 1895. So what more the less economically developed countries?
nothing, nothing.
And 1895 wasn't that long
No,
ago.
it's literally 1890. That's two people ago, bro. 1895. That's maybe even three people ago. That's how I count long distances now. I count hundreds of years in people. That's one person, that's two person, that's three person. And that gives me such a healthy perspective to see that, hold on, things are happening really quickly and I don't really have it so bad. I wanted to touch something that I watched this guy called Akash Singer, who's a comedian on Flagrant 2 with Andrew
Yeah,
Schultz,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And he said something so powerful to me, being an immigrant, having parents come from Zimbabwe to here and to had to restart life. And he was saying that, listen, like, bro, like you'd have no idea the struggle and the pain your parents went through, right? To even leave their own home country, to come to a new world, searching for better opportunity. How hard it possibly was to make that money, how hard it was to say bye to your family, how hard it was to enter a new country and possibly live in I know when we moved in, and I was thinking about this, we moved into a one bedroom apartment. I'm not sure if my mum's are going to be okay with me saying this, but we moved into a one bedroom apartment. I'm sorry, mum. We moved into a one bedroom apartment, and there was four of us. There was my mum, my dad, my older brother, and my younger brother. And I swear, Les, bro, I completely forgot this even happened. I
Well, that's the thing you pointed out. People don't realize how lucky we have it now. And the thing is, it's not that to say that things are perfect. We're not living in a
no,
utopia,
definitely not.
but great strides have been made. And I think, as being someone who is from Zimbabwe and a third world country, I have seen what real oppression looks like,
Mm,
what real suffering looks like. everyone is, if you have a very basic understanding of history, like I think Robert Mugabe is probably one of the most iconic and infamous dictators to ever lead a
Mm-hmm.
country. And well, you probably know it just as well as I do. During the elections, he'd go to rural areas and have police officers and the army go to people's homes, bang on their doors, drag them to the polls,
Mm-hmm.
beat them, and go and tell them to vote for said party and said political
Mm-hmm.
leader in the elections, not just once, but a plethora of
Many
times.
times.
And what's really, really worrying is that political tactic is still very much
Yeah.
striving in this current day and
Mm.
age. So when people from the West say they're oppressed, and it's like, you have no idea how good
Yeah.
you have it.
100%.
You have no idea how good you have it.
There isn't that perspective, bro. There isn't that acknowledgement. And what I'd also like to say is that, well, each person's situation is different. Different? Yeah. Each person's situation is different. And it's like, what do you think people in England, possibly people in the States, are completely missing in 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 their lives? And um like I also would like to acknowledge that like the type of trauma that African Americans are going through is slightly different to the trauma and the things that I've gone through in the UK. But what do you think those people are missing? What do you think is, or what do you think the things are? Because I like,
Conversation,
mm, mm,
conversation, conversation. That's in the most concise fashion to answer that. It's conversation. There's a lack of conversation in the age of cancel culture and self censorship. It's hard to have those conversations. Freedom of speech is really under attack, and it's very worrying. And the one thing that I've realized, when I feel like people don't quite understand what freedom of speech
mm,
is, because the way the people who perceive the people who are in favor of freedom of
mhm.
speech, they think, oh, you're just using freedom of speech as an excuse to spouse
Yes,
hate speech.
yes. And with that, I think that there's a lot of very, very sensitive people, extremely sensitive people. As we keep on coming across, it's like it's quite for me it's quite frustrating, because when you call a spade, I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm just trying to base the facts as best as I possibly can with the amount of knowledge I have at this present
Mm.
moment in time. And that doesn't mean I'm not willing to change. It means that I am of this worldview until someone else provides me with better information.
Well, I'm really glad you pointed that out, because I think freedom of speech shows the quality of being curious. And
Mm,
to me, when you stop being curious, you stop learning and wanting to grow. That's how I see it, because I think freedom of speech helps us to think. And the one thing that I've realized is that thinking is an external process, not an internal process. That's why when we're in schools, we're taught to say it out loud, put it in your own words. When we have homework and assignments, you get discredited or marked down, when you don't put things into your own words. And, again, writing it down, that's an external
mm,
process. I think people are of the assumption that you just digest things, you absorb things, and then it's there cemented in your
psyche.
system,
Yeah.
in your
Let's.
psyche. Correct. Because look, we're having a conversation right now and some of these topics for the first time, and we are going to formulate some ideas very awkwardly and incorrectly. But the more we have these conversations, the more we can better articulate our words in a cohesive manner
Mm,
that's hopefully very eloquent and very conveying, that the other person can can understand. And then the other point that I have to put out there is that without freedom of speech, you wouldn't be able to have a conversation about anything, because the common rebuttal is that, you know, it's offensive. But if we're being adults and being rational, you can't have a serious conversation about anything with anyone without being offensive, especially if that conversation or that topic matter is important. So the rule is you can't offend anyone. I'm having a conversation with you right now. That's one-on-one. What if it's a conversation with 3 people? Oh, okay, I might be able to manage that. 10 people?
It's hard.
Okay. 100 people? 1,000 people? You're going to have a conversation about race, religion, politics, exercise, obesity,
Gender,
sex and gender without offending and you think you're going to have that conversation without offending someone? It's really, really hard. It's really, really hard. And then people are promoting, tougher laws on hate speech. I'm not okay with that. I don't think it's a good idea, because the one thing that I learned about hate speech is, and again, this is not me being naive, hate speech exists. I think if you've had a serious, contentious conversation with anyone and it's gotten heated, you've probably uttered some hate speech in the moment, and they've probably said some
Oh
back.
mate, I thought you were gonna go down the
People say
opposite route of being a young black man living in up north in the hills, mate.
people say reprehensible things, outrageous things, disgusting things, quasi-criminal things all the time. And again, I'm not naive. I think for every action there should be a reaction, and I'm definitely not naive and immature enough to believe that if you do something, you shouldn't have the just penalties and consequences of said actions. But the one thing that I've learned is that for something to be considered a hate speech, it's how the victim registers it. So, for an example, I could, or just a hate crime, not just hate speech, I could hit my mom. God forbid.
I'm glad you said it.
I could hit my mom, and my mom might put that down as domestic abuse. She could put that down as racial abuse, because she's a black woman. She could put that as a misogynistic attack, and that's when the waters can get very muddied very, very, very quickly. Because who gets to define hate? Who gets to regulate it? What I consider offensive and what you consider offensive might be on two bipolar ends of the spectrum, the antithesis of each other.
You know what's really hitting is that, like, to put it simply, is to not take things personally, right? It is to take things as they are. And of course, if something offends you, be vocal about it. You're definitely not saying to people, stay quiet when something offends you or something bad happens to you. I think what you're promoting is have a voice and be reasonable, be conscientious of, well, is this the true intent? And I think what I find to be very difficult about
I
that.
mean, in all fairness, though, it's hard. I think
hard.
It's extremely hard. It's extremely hard because, again, like I said, I'm not naive to invalidate the reality of hate speech and hate crimes. They exist. They happen all the time. But it's very difficult because, okay, going back to the topic of having conversation and freedom of speech that we started. the best way to put it is, I believe freedom of speech is so important because conversation and negotiation beats war.
You know, one of the when I started law school, right? They gave me a book, and the book was all about negotiation. And my lecturer actually said to me, "Listen, like obviously you're buying this book because it's going to help you in your mediation part of your law degree, this, that, the other, but it's not. This is a lifelong skill." Like, and he made it so apparent. Like, I couldn't care less if you use this for your law degree. Just understand, by reading this book, you have skills and tools to be able to navigate your way through life, and that's you. You've really touched on it. Like, there is no negotiate. No one's willing to negotiate. You know, it's either my way or the highway. It's either I'm right, you're wrong. I'm big, you're small. Like Matilda, right? There's no room for negotiation, and I guess like that negotiation. I wanna know what negotiation is for you. Is it speaking to come to solutions? Is it speaking to coming to understanding? What is negotiation to you? And what how
It's
do we practically apply that, or what are your ideas of practically applying that?
it's the form. It's the former and the
Mm,
latter, because with freedom of speech, you're then able to. Okay, there's this one thing that I was always one thing that my brother always used to say to me growing up. He always used to say, a smart person isn't afraid to ask a stupid question,
mm,
and it's okay to admit that you don't know, and it's even more admirable to admit that you're willing to ask, to show that you are in a position to learn. And one personal example of this, and it heavily applies to what's been going on in the past 2 years, and even prior to that, I've had a lot of conversations with some of them really good close friends of
mhm,
mine on race, and I've had to explain to them why they can't use the N
mm,
word. I've had to take on that
mm,
mantle and have that. Don't get me wrong, because I know it is, and with other topics, it's very exhausting, especially when you have to repeat and reiterate the same points in a very cohesive, factual
mm,
manner. I've had to have conversations with my friends, explain to them why they can't use the N word, some of my
mm.
experiences, and so on and so on. And in the process, they've said some very naive, sometimes not even well thought through points.
Completely stupid. I'm gonna say it, mate. Just stupid points.
But
My friends have
yeah,
said it too.
but you have to give people, a certain amount of
Mm,
leverage. You have to be
mm,
lenient, and you have to understand, it. Well, you have to assume that it's coming from a place of goodwill. But to cut a long story short, if I didn't have those conversations with those people, those conversations that are, heavily mandated on the basis of freedom of speech, and allowing them to say exactly what they want to say, as poorly and as misinformed as they
mhm.
are, they wouldn't be able to learn, they wouldn't be able to understand, they wouldn't be able to grow.
Yes.
And what's really fascinating is some of those people that I've had those conversations with are now allies and have really understood racism, and they are in the vanguard of anti-racism and Black Lives Matter, if not the vanguard itself. All because I was willing to engage in the dialogue. Because look, the last thing is, if you don't engage in these conversations, or you completely denounce them and shut them out, all it's going to prove is that you're not willing to help me become a better person,
Mm,
and my opinion on you and not helping me just stays the same, and I'm going to have the exact same ideas and
mm,
ideologies that I had, and they're not going to
Mm.
change.
You know, a counter to that would be that it's not your responsibility to educate other people. And like, I think that, and my personal counter to that is that, well, the change you want to see in the world really does start with this person who's just asked you this rather naive question, or this person who's completely confused and lost. And like, I think with that openness to conversation really, really, really allows the world to move into a direction of genuine non-judgment, not trademark or virtue signaling non-judgment. It really leads to
Mm.
a forwarding conversation of the of human beings, not the human race, human beings, and it brings us closer. Yet, what without the way these conversations are happening and the way we're being instigated as individuals through social media, through politics, through even through own personal life experiences, right? I'm not even trying to negate those experiences. What then happens is we there's a hardened shell. There's this hardness, and then what what's now cultivating with that hardness is that there's, let's call it, white fragility. There's white guilt that's happening in the world. People feeling guilty, and of course, I know many genuine people like call a spade and whatever. Excuse me. Don't get me wrong, but without that openness from one party, the other party, it's like, how do I explain it? It's like when someone you really care about has you've done something really bad to someone you care about, right? And you just try your very best to make sure that that person's okay. And then the other person that is receiving that care or is receiving that try hard starts to get annoyed at the try hard. And it's like, and it's like with that,
But
yes,
the one thing that I will say, and it's my biggest issue with cancel
yeah,
culture, is that the authoritarians and the gatekeepers to who gets cancelled and who doesn't,
mm,
people want to act like as if they've always had this vast amount of knowledge and insight into important topics, and they haven't had to unlearn and learn new things about them, that they were almost born with it. And I think it's very stupid, and it's not thought through, because everyone makes mistakes, because we're human beings, and human beings aren't perfect. We're not
mm,
gods, and we are likely to make more mistakes than
yeah.
good. And I just find it a bit fascinating that we're willing to dig up, the archives of Washington Ali's tweets from
All right,
2012.
bro, you actually don't want to do that. I actually went through a delete spree. Oh my goodness, they were terrible, mate. I was chatting so much donut stuff. And to that point, bro, like,
But the scary thing about cancel culture is that there's a lot of people that we revere and hold in high
mm,
regard, and put them on pedestals, and sometimes even idolize them. And then some tweets or some evidence to some, again, not to say that it's fine, reprehensible behavior, reprehensible tweets and acts of the past
mm,
surface, and the mob is scary, and they just get crucified and lambasted
yeah,
and lose a lot of credibility.
mm,
It's scary, because the one thing that I always look at it like, it's these are people who the majority have held in really high regard and revere.
mm,
What more if that was me?
mm. You know,
I'm just a regular person, a normal person. These some of these people who are getting cancelled have, done some really remarkable things for the greater good, not just for themselves, but for
mm,
mankind. And it's a bit odd. And the one thing that's actually quite funny is The mob seems like a bit of a myth. It's like Bigfoot
Yeah.
until you
Yeah.
experience it. Because one example we can use is Whoopi Goldberg
Mm.
with what she said on Jews. You know, she's very pro cancel culture and people losing their jobs and their livelihood. She's currently
Mm.
suspended for the comments that she made, and inevitably, it was a dragon that was going to eat its own tail, because once upon a time, not that long ago, you were in the mob and you're probably the one person leading the mob, and now you've said some things, and now the mob has turned on you and they're banging at your door.
Yeah, it's crazy how
It's
quickly the mob like how one slight moment of your brain being turned off turns into your entire life. You're condemned for life, you know. And I've whilst she's been speaking, a thought that's been popping up in my head is that the way that information travels is so fast, it doesn't give a moment's notice for thought. It gives a moment's notice. It's like when I receive a Kanye post, right? It goes ping, and I'm like, I'm either really happy to see that it's released Donda 2, which hopefully he does, which he probably is not, or I'm really upset to see every single person saying, oh, him and this and that are happening, and you're just like, oh, I so feel for my bro, you know. And it's like everything that happens is instant emotion, and then I'm happy that I have the ability to still experience the emotion, right? I'm not gonna not feel what I feel, but I'm gonna think it.
yeah, you know what Callum's mean.
Yeah, you know, I love that. You know what
Yeah.
kind of mean. And I'm gonna feel what I feel, but I'm gonna respond to this. And do I think responding like this is genuinely appropriate? Not just because of my own personal life experience, but to the scale to the scale in which this thing has occurred. You know, and what's so crazy is that I personally deem, like, I've got two theories like that. Either all of this cancel culture is eventually going to stabilize itself. It's eventually going to everyone's going to realize that, hey, actually, no, these 100 million people on Twitter are not the same amount of the 6 billion 900 million other people in the real world. Because, my bro, when I speak to my friends like you, when I speak to other people around the world, that their worldview is very, 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 very balanced. You know, so
But do you know what the thing is? I actually, I'm going to disagree with you. I don't think cancel culture is going to die down anytime soon, because you touched on it earlier. It's it's a quick route to moral virtue. It's a very easy way to show that you're on the
mm,
side of good. Someone says something understandably, and in a lot of cases, outrightly wrong, rude, racist, transphobic, and so on. It's easy for you to point your finger at them and be like, you are disgusting.
mm,
That is absolutely appalling. You should lose your job. You should lose your livelihood. You should pay a fine, possibly jail
mm,
time, and so on. It's very easy. But the way I see it is that, as I just said, it's a quick route to moral virtue, but more importantly, it doesn't require a lot of effort.
mm.
And that's the problem. Because
I want to bounce back on that. I want to bounce back on
most of
that
the
really
things
quickly.
that
It seems like a lot of effort not to speak on something that you potentially feel offended about, or something that triggers some form of emotional response. Like, I'm only saying that because that's the type of response that it could get, you know, saying that statement. So I just want you to
Mm.
talk back to that, to talk back to that response.
well, well, the reason why I said that's my problem with activism and social justice warriors, because they are the main people pushing the vanguard, or not being the vanguard itself, of
Mm,
cancel culture. And I keep reiterating this time and time again. It's not that to say that there aren't reprehensible things being said and being acted out in the world. There is a plethora of things. But it doesn't require a lot of work in the sense that it's very easy to look at the world and to point a finger and critique everything that's wrong with it. I've forgotten which philosopher said it, but he said it's easier to judge the world. It's easier to judge than it is to think. And I think that's remarkably true. I really do think it really is, because
It's
I
Carl
think
Jung, by
that
the way. I just googled it.
it doesn't require no, the reason why I said it doesn't require a lot of work is because, well, anyone can just, point the finger at someone and say, that's disgusting, that's terrible, you're a bad person, blah 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 blah. Anyone can, jump outside. No, you can cut that out. Anyone. I think that the problem with
Well,
with with
I've got a
with
good
with
example for
with
you, bro.
cancel.
It's easier to watch your favorite commentator talk about a certain topic that you love or are very interested in, and take on their point of view. It's easier to do that than to do the research yourself, and it's also easier to watch a 2-second clip, a 1-minute clip of someone doing something stupid to make that decision. And that's how I'm hearing what you're saying. Like, you don't have to think about anything. Like, you've seen a 1-minute clip. Your 1-minute clip lets you know he's being very angry, he's being very rude. So that means he's an angry, rude white male, you know, or he's being very
Yeah,
angry,
yeah,
or he's being very
yeah.
angry. He's talking to someone. He's tall and he's black. Oh, he's talking to someone very aggressively, you know, like, and then we end up placing these value layers of value on things that we have no context to, we have no understanding to. And of course, like, as humans, we have to take in information as quickly as possible and make snap judgments. Yet why then does your judgment have to be held as if it's a fact? Why does your judgment have to be held as if it's the only thing that's possible in your infinity number of possible ways to view a scenario?
Well, going back to my initial point, like, it's the problem with cancel culture is that it's a quick route to moral virtue, in the sense that it doesn't require a lot of work, and it's actually very, very hard to get yourself together, and you have to do that in ways that you can't trumpet. I'm going to use a very pop culture reference. There's this song by the All American Rejects called Dirty Little Secrets, and they had a music video. And just to basically give you an idea of what the music video is about, it was a a large number of people, cutscenes, 1 second cutscenes, and they have all their literal dirty secrets on a sign, a board, and their faces blurred out. And it's really, em- embarrassing, awkward things that are just odd, like, I pee in the bathroom sink, I steal from my dad's wallet, all those kinds of things. And that's a lot of the things that are wrong with us. They're second rate and embarrassing. In some degrees, there are some people who are psychologically troubled and need real help. But for the average person, it's just very low resolution things that unfortunately take a lot of time, and you have to do it in private. It's things like your proclivity to procrastinate, um, your trouble to engage in a healthy relationship with your mom or dad, or your girlfriend or your boyfriend. It's things that, don't happen overnight.
Mm,
That's the issue.
mm,
But, you know, you have a sign or a tweet, or you're outing someone for being racist, transphobic, homophobic, everything in between, and so on, then you get all the acclaim and validation in a matter of seconds, and you can talk about it.
mm,
You can show the world, which is why I always say it's not thought through, because you can easily down the street, and have a sign saying I'm against world poverty, end hunger. It's like, yeah, who the hell isn't though? Like any rational person who's level-headed is not going to be against child poverty and would want wars. And here's the one thing that I always say to people, it's like, look, even if you're a tyrant, you are going to want people to live in the best conditions possible so that you can exploit and take advantage of the skills and talents that they have.
Yeah.
You know, that's why you get paid a wage and a salary. It's like, Washi, that law degree you have, that skill and that talent you have, I can benefit
Yeah.
from that. I can pay you from that.
Mm.
You know, you don't see, like, I don't know, you know, in The Simpsons where they're up in the castle with like all the Democrats, the Texan guy with the hat, and
Yeah.
like there's Dracula and there's like lightning going down. They're not saying, "Oh, we need more poverty and world hunger," and the thing. It's like, no, no. And some of these oppressive white males that are at the top of the male patriarchy, I don't think they care about what race, religion, gender you are, as long as you have a talent and they can exploit. They're going to take an
Yeah,
interest in
100.
you
What?
because talent's hard to come. Talent's
It's
hard to come
hard,
by.
bro.
Like talent's really, really hard to. Genuine talent, genuine intellect. It's
Yeah,
rare.
literally.
So, yeah, it's easy to point at the world and say this is wrong. This is, you're a bad person. You've done A, B, and C and D. It's incredibly easy. But what's even harder is to get yourself in order.
Mm.
It's really, really hard because it's the same. I'm going to use this analogy because I'm somewhat in the fitness world. You know, it's like when people start going on a diet and wanting to better themselves, you know, they they go for the diet coke instead of the normal coke. And it's your brain playing a one up on you because, you know, it doesn't require that much work as actually putting in the work of changing your diet, changing your lifestyle.
Mm.
It's just a brain pulling a quick one
Mm.
on you. It's so yeah, which is why I always say, like, the solution to the problem of humanity lies with the integrity of the individual. If you rather focused on yourself and bettered yourself and focused on all those little flaws you have, your proclivity to procrastinate and everything in between, not only do you make your life
Mm.
better, but you make the lives of everyone around you imminently better,
Wow. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
instantaneously. And but we live in the world of social media, in the age where social media is prevalent. If you are not talking about it, if you're not tweeting about it, if you're not posting about it on your story, you're a really bad guy. You don't
Mm.
care. Why do you not care? And then that's the other issue I have, is we have to share the pain and suffering of everyone else, which I think is incredibly
Mm.
unhealthy. It's incredibly unhealthy, and it's not good to be living in constant fear and trouble. Because the thing is, again, it's not to say that there isn't anything wrong in the world and that it's a perfect utopia. I'm not saying that at all. But I wrote a piece in my notes and I put it on my Instagram story and then my highlight, and I got quite a response, mostly positive. And I was basically touching on the fact that you can't take on the plight and know the plight of every single person in the world because there is so much going on. I mean, right now, you know, the war in Yemen is still going on. There's still slaves in Libya.
Why?
The situation in Haiti. And these are things that I've just cited off the top of my head. There's probably many more. And natural disasters probably happened that I don't know about, that you don't know about. There's so much going on. And the thing that people realize is that, or what they don't want to realize and accept, is that we are self-serving human beings. I mean, you did business studies, and there's this concept of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have to address the physical needs before you get to the physiological needs. And that touches on it nicely. And to go into more depth, it's basically you are a human being centered in one place. You are not omnipresent. And what I mean by omnipresent is that you are not God. You are not Thor, if you like Marvel comics. You're not a supercomputer working for the FBI. You can't be ever at once and know everything that's going on at once. And because you are only centered in one place, your perception of the world is going to be biased because it's what you
Yeah,
see.
and it's going to be related. It's going to be related
So
to your
you
own
could,
personal experience as well. And like what
yeah. So you
oh,
could,
sorry to cut you off, my bro. But what's really just struck me is that people are. I'm not saying not everyone has to sort out. What people are doing is they're taking the chaos from their home, from their internal world, and then going to re-express the same chaos but in a different format to
to
the
the
world,
world.
exactly, causing more chaos. And I'm not saying don't share your life story. I'm not saying don't do all these things. Yeah,
Yeah.
why are you doing it? You know, what is the purpose? What is the end goal here? And not everything has to have an end goal, or you don't have to be super successful in this, that, the other. Yeah, is it in accordance to the life that you want to be living? Is it in accordance to the type of person that you want to be when you're older? And as you quite rightly stated, you do. It's not like you don't care. You do care. Yeah, is it relevant to you? Is it relevant to where you're at in your life right now to be able to do something about it? And on that note, my bro,
Mhm.
I want to know who.
Well, hang on. Before we get to the conclusion and end it, the one thing that I wanted to point out is that people don't like the idea that we as human beings are
Mm,
self-serving. And with that, as I was alluding to, and I'll try and wrap this up very quickly, is like I said, we are human
mm,
beings. We are centered in one place. We can't be
mhm,
omnipresent because we're not gods, we're not
mm,
supercomputers. So, what that means is that we perceive what we can see, which would then ultimately suggest that we have a tainted view of the world. And on top of that, it's biased because we are self serving. So, to go deeper, a good person takes care of his or her
mhm.
family. Are you going to get rid of that?
No, you can't.
No, you would. You wouldn't get rid of that. You wouldn't. So, what does that mean? And this is another thing that I realized. People don't understand the definition of prejudice. The definition of prejudice is favorable and non-favorable discrimination. So the fact that you are choosing to take care of your family and your loved ones means that you're choosing your family to
Mm,
outsiders. That's
mm,
what it means. And people don't like that. Look, there's a book in Huxley's New
mm,
World. You had to submit yourself to anyone who wanted any form of sexual activity with
mhm,
you. Do you want to live in a world like that where you have to give yourself up sexually in an egalitarian manner to
mm.
anyone? Because do you know what? It is actually very rude to turn down the advances of someone who's interested in you. But that's life. That's reality. That's the most prejudicial thing that you do.
Yeah.
It is. No,
No,
really,
I'm
it
just
is.
find it funny because
Like when you choose a sexual part, you choose when you choose a sexual partner, you usually go for the most attractive, maybe the healthiest, maybe the one that doesn't piss you off the most.
take your pick.
What about the rest of them? That doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad people.
Mm, mm,
So yeah, there's prejudice in the battles you choose to
mm,
take on. That doesn't make you. You shouldn't be made to feel a bad person because you didn't choose to um, not partake in a hashtag or some movement or donate to some cause. Some people really are still at the bottom of the hierarchy of Maslow's needs. Some people still really and understandably stressing on the physiological needs. Some people really want to figure out where they're going to get food from, water, shelter. And then once you've established that, maybe you can strive for a sense of belonging, and maybe that can come in the shape of pursuing a career you enjoy, helping the
Finding
world,
friends,
activism,
joining
and so
groups.
on.
Just it doesn't
Finding friends, hey, yeah, having a sense of community
Mm,
and so on, and then, you know,
mm,
and the thing is with the activism, activism isn't a bad thing. I don't think activism is a bad thing. There are going to be some battles that I choose to take on that other people might not necessarily take on. And there are going to be some really important battles and fights that I have to take
mm,
on, regardless of my
yeah.
situation. But the thing is with social activism, it's as you touched on in the age of social media, it's fast, it's instantaneous, it's now, it's hard hitting. You have to do it, and more unfortunately, you have to be seen doing it.
Mm,
Um, I was speaking on the Mason Greenwood situation, and because I'm only on Instagram, I'm not on any other social media platforms. I have to actually watch the news, read the articles. If I'm lucky, ask a few friends. But what you can take away from that is that it takes me a while to process and to have a good understanding of what's
mm,
going on. But in the process, I have to ask around. I have to be willing to formulate my ideas awkwardly and maybe, in an
mm.
offensive manner. And the other thing that comes with activism is PC culture, being politically correct. And straight off the bat, I was like, look, I'm not condoning the actions of Mason Greenwood. I think what he did is absolutely reprehensible. It's disgusting, and he should face the consequences of his actions. But what I then went on to say was that I wonder what Manchester United are going to do from a business
Mm.
standpoint. I wonder how they're going to handle this, because I don't know if you really followed football like that, but basically Mason Greenwood is a very talented footballer, and he is helping Manchester United get to where they are currently. He's a really good footballer. So, from a business standpoint, you have this asset that's really helping your business survive. Are you going to get rid of it? And straight away in the group chat, I asked this question. I was inundated with like, how can you even empathize with him? How can you even say this and that? You know, Chak, we don't tolerate this round here. No, 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 we don't act like that. I was like, I never said I condone rape or the actions of
Mm.
Mason Greenwood. I actually never said that. What I'm asking is something way, way deeper and
Complicated.
way more serious. But because people want to be seen on the side of good, they don't want to listen. They don't want to engage in the
Mm.
conversation. And then I went on to have the conversation with someone else, and they were like, no, that's actually a really good question. And then they went on to answer my question with an example. Last year in summer, um, one of the Botang brothers, I think it's like the cooler one with the tattoos. I think it could be
Mm.
Jeremy, but he domestically assaulted his girlfriend, and in the process, he broke a rib cage and punctured her kidney, and he had to pay a fine of like 1.8 million euros.
To who though?
And he still continued to play professional football.
Well,
So, there've been examples. It answered
yeah,
my question. It answered my
that's
initial
fucked.
question. It's like, what would the club do from it? And it goes to show that there has been times where,
That's fucked. Yeah.
but because you can't have these conversations and you can't progress it because people are more obsessed with being
So,
seen on the side of
mm,
good and being virtuous, we're just hitting a brick wall. We're not progressing. We're not going
mm,
in a cohesive manner. And it was just like, it's very very upsetting because it's yeah, again, you have to engage in these conversations. You have to be willing to formulate ideas awkwardly. You have to be willing to say some really
Mm,
stupid things. You have to,
mm. Yeah, you have to
I,
be
I,
you have
I,
to
I,
be
I
willing
don't
to be
know.
wrong, you know. You have to be really, really willing to be wrong and having the conversation. I think Jordan Peterson says it the best. You have to be open. You have to be willing to offend someone because that's what our conversation is, you know. Because someone
Yeah.
you won't necessarily get offended, but most likely, if you're formulating ideas, you probably are going to say something that another person doesn't agree with, you know. But my bro,
Well, there's going to be well,
we've got to start wrapping it up, my bro. We've got to start wrapping it up. We could chat for hours, and like we'll
oh,
definitely have to do this again. But what I'd really before we wrap it up, I just want you to, I guess, have a recording stamp in time of the man, the person, the being you are becoming. And also, I'd like to hear an inference of what you think is going to become of the world as well.
um, well, I'm not particularly a nihilistic person, and I don't want to be. I don't want to say that life is suffering and life has no
Mm,
meaning. I think that that's characteristic of
mm,
life, and there are a lot of tragedies and misfortunes that are going on in the world, and to a certain degree, you shouldn't take it personally. And again, that's not to say that there isn't suffering, there isn't oppression, there isn't injustices. What you can do is voluntarily accept that and then strive
mm.
to overcome it
What
and try
so
and become the best version of
for
yourself.
you personally, my bro,
Because
sorry to cut you out. I want to know about you, what you think is going to become of the world, and what you and the person you are becoming as well, or the person you are going to become. Not speaking to other people, but you speaking as yourself about yourself.
oh,
Yeah.
it would it would be a cliffhanger, I guess, if I was to answer that. Because you see, this is one of the things that I'm trying to emphasize. It's okay to say that you don't
Mm,
know. There shouldn't be any shame in saying that. Look, this is above my level of intelligence. What I know, um, I would like to hope that it's going to be in a positive direction.
mm,
Of course, um, for me, it would be more of what I would like to more than where I see the world going. I would like to see the world move in a direction where people are more willing to have conversations, people are more willing to
mm,
listen, um, and not afraid to be curious, not afraid to formulate ideas and statements as they want to. And in an age of self censorship, I want objective truths and grand narratives to still be relevant, because I think that's really important, because some of these grand narratives and these noble truths that the postmodernists are shutting down are what help us give meaning to our
mm,
life.
mm. So
And I think that could help us, and even myself, be guided in a good direction towards a healthier, better world.
and I love that. That's really beautiful. And what is going to become of Leslie or Shaq? What is going to become of you? Who are you becoming as a being on this earth?
Someone who isn't afraid to risk being offensive in order to learn. Um, Someone who is going to continuously embark on curiosity. Someone who isn't afraid to voice their opinions and say how they feel on things, because that's another thing. We live in a time where it's scary to speak your mind and say how you feel about things, especially